Something impossible used to happen in the mountains of northern Italy, not once, but 4 times a year. Perfectly healthy men and women this moment would suddenly collapse, mid-sentence, mid-meal, mid-breath. In the next moment, their bodies would go cold, their pulse would vanish. Families would gather around them, not in panic, but in silence, because they knew something far worse than death had just begun. They knew that if they moved the body, the soul would never find its way back. Their souls were gone, not lost, taken, dragged into a war no living person was supposed to see. And the most terrifying part wasn't that these people left their bodies behind. It was that the survival of the entire village depended on whether they came back. They believed those souls were being pulled into the sky, forced to fight in a hidden battlefield where the outcome decided whether crops would grow or entire communities would starve to death. They spoke of a war between unseen armies, one fighting with fennel to protect the harvest, the other with sorghum to rot it from the ground up. And if they lost, famine wasn't a possibility, it was a guarantee. But something went wrong. The warriors who claimed they were saving humanity were suddenly accused of serving the devil, interrogated, broken, forced to confess to crimes they once swore they were fighting against. So the question is, were these people truly protecting the world from an invisible force? Or were they part of something far darker that even they didn't understand? Imagine a world where the survival of your village, the very food on your plate, depends on a war fought in your sleep. In the mist-choked fields of 17th century Friuli in northern Italy, this wasn't a fairy tale or a nightmare, it was a terrifying reality. While the rest of Europe was burning witches at the stake for poisoning cattle or cursing neighbours, the peasants of that Italian northeast were harbouring a secret society that claimed to be the only thing standing between humanity and total starvation. They called themselves the Benandanti, the good walkers, and 4 times a year they left their bodies behind to fight a spectral war that no ordinary human eye could see. The mystery of the Benandanti begins at birth. To be a soldier in this invisible army, you had to be born in the caul, wrapped in the translucent inner membrane of the amniotic sac. In the folklore of the Friuli, this wasn't just a biological rarity, it was a divine draft notice. Mothers would carefully peel the membrane from the newborn's face, dry it, and sew it into a small amulet to be worn around the child's neck. This dried piece of flesh was the soldier's ticket to the astral battlefield. Without it, they were trapped in the world of the living, unable to answer the call when the spirits began to drum. The call always came during the ember days, the quattro tempora. These were the 4 seasonal shifts of the year, times when the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thinnest. As the sun set on these holy weeks, a sudden, heavy lethargy would overcome the Benandanti. It wasn't sleep, it was a catatonic trance. A man might be sitting at his dinner table, or a woman might be tending to her hearth, when their eyes would roll back, their breathing would slow to a ghostly crawl, and their pulse would vanish. To any onlooker, they appeared dead. But in reality, they had just been deployed. The sensation of the departure was described as a cold rush, a tearing of the soul from the meat of the body. Once free, the Benandanti took the form of small animals, cats, hares, or even butterflies, before assuming their spectral human shapes. They didn't carry swords or shields of steel. Instead, they armed themselves with the symbols of the earth. The Benandanti carried stalks of fennel, heavy, fragrant, and resilient. They flew across the dark Italian skies, converging on a desolate, otherworldly plain known as the Valley of Josaphat. But they weren't alone in the valley. Waiting for them in the shadows were the Malandanti, the evil walkers. These were the witches of famine, the servants of decay. If the Benandanti were the protectors of the grain, the Malandanti were its executioners. They were armed with stalks of sorghum, the devil's weed, dry, brittle, and jagged. The air in the valley didn't smell of incense or ozone. It smelled of damp earth and rotting vegetation. The drums began to beat, a sound that vibrated not in the ears, but in the centre of the spirit. The Battle of the Ember Days was a masterpiece of sensational, spectral violence. This wasn't a choreographed duel, it was a chaotic, visceral riot of spirits. The Benandanti and Malandanti would clash with a ferocity that shook the astral plane. They beat each other with their stalks of fennel and sorghum, the impact sending off sparks of green and black light. To the Benandanti, every blow struck was a prayer for the harvest. If they could drive the Malandanti from the field, the wheat would grow tall, the vines would be heavy with grapes, and the village would feast. If they lost, the sorghum would choke the fields, the frost would come early, and the children of Friuli would die of hunger in the winter. The fear surrounding these battles was twofold. First, there was the terror of the famine, the very real threat that the invisible war would end in defeat. But second, there was the terror of the lost soul. If a Benandanti's body was moved or turned over while they were in their trance, their spirit would be unable to find its way back through the mouth. They would be condemned to wander the fields as a ghost forever, watching their own body be buried while they screamed in a voice no one could hear. This was the burden of the good walker. They were the only ones who could save the world, but they risked their eternal soul every time the seasons changed. As the 1600s progressed, a new shadow entered the Friuli, the holy office of the Inquisition. The church had heard the whispers of the peasants. They heard of the trances, the spirit flights, and the battles in the night. When the inquisitors first began their interrogations, they were baffled. They expected to find devil worshippers who kissed the hooves of goats and cursed the crucifix. Instead, they found simple farmers who insisted they were the soldiers of Christ. We fight for the faith. The Benandanti told the priests, we fight so that the poor may eat. But the Inquisition did not believe in good witches. To the cold, logical mind of the church, any power that didn't come from a priest's blessing must come from a demon's pact. The pacing of the persecutions accelerated. They didn't use the stake at first. They used the mind. They subjected the Benandanti to grueling, repetitive questioning, twisting their words until the fennel became a wand and the spirit flight became a Sabbath. The sensationalism of the astral war was stripped away and replaced with a dark, standardized language of Satanism. The tragedy of the Benandanti is that they were eventually convinced of their own evil. Under the pressure of the Inquisition, the younger generations began to forget the good walking. They began to believe that their trances were indeed demonic. The good they brought to society, the psychological comfort of believing the harvest was being protected, was replaced by a paralyzing paranoia, neighbours began to watch neighbours for the call. Midwives were accused of stealing the birth membranes to sell to the devil. The secret army was dismantled not by force, but by the slow, agonising erosion of their identity. The end of the Benandanti came when the spirit battles finally stopped. Whether they were suppressed by the church or simply faded as the modern world encroached on the ancient fields, the silence of the Ember Days was a death knell for the old folk magic of Italy. But even today, when the mist rolls off the mountains of Friuli and the wind whistles through the drying stalks of the fields, the locals remember. They remember the time when the fate of the world was decided in a valley of shadows, fought by men and women who carried nothing but a stalk of fennel and a piece of their own birth skin. They remember the queen of the harvest and her army of ghosts, and they wonder, if the Benandanti are gone, who is left to fight the Malandanti when the famine comes?